The magnate, the secret son, and the second chance action required. If you believe in second chances and secrets that change everything, smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the ultimate reveal. What if, months after a devastating divorce, you stumbled upon your ex-wife holding a baby? That's precisely what happened to Alexander Vance, a powerful CEO who thought he had finally left his past behind. But the moment he saw his ex, Serafina Wells, again, a terrifying doubt began to consume him. Could that child be his son? This is a story of unexpected reunions, carefully guarded secrets, and choices that can forever alter destinies. Stay with me until the very end, because the truth about to be revealed will shatter everything you think you know. Drop a like if you're ready for the drama. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were Alexander? Demand answers or walk away. Part 1. The Crack in the Empire. The morning sky over London was a grim gray, and the reflection of the glass skyscrapers of Canary Wharf created a somber, yet impeccably ordered backdrop, much like the life of Alexander Vance. He strode with confident steps across the marble lobby of Vance Global, his face serious, his bespoke Savile Row suit flawless, as if nothing could ever shake his meticulously planned routine. To all who watched him, Alexander was the personification of success, the ruthless CEO, respected, feared, and always in control. Yet behind that imposing image lay an emptiness he preferred to ignore, the silence of a penthouse devoid of laughter and warmth since the day Serafina Wells walked out the door, taking not just her luggage, but a part of him that never returned. Months had passed since the divorce. On paper, it was resolved. In his soul, however, it was an open wound. Alexander plunged into work, believing that multi-million-pound contracts and corporate conquests would be enough to fill the void, until destiny, as whimsical as always, decided to flip his life upside down in a single, paralyzing instant. He was rushing out of the building for a meeting when he saw her, Serafina. His heart stopped for a second, and all the city noises, the double-decker bus horns, the hurried footsteps, the voices, vanished. She was there, just meters away, her hair loose in waves, her face serene, yet her eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. But it wasn't just her that froze him. Clutched in her arms, wrapped in a light blanket, was a baby of about 8 months, with rosy cheeks and large eyes that shone like a cruel mirror of Alexander himself in his childhood photos. The impact was so devastating that he nearly lost his footing. His mind, accustomed to solving complex business equations, was now incapable of processing the obvious. Serafina was holding a child, and that child might be his. The air left his lungs, yet he managed to articulate a sound. His voice choked. "Serafina, what is this?" She tightened her grip on the baby against her chest, as if instinctively trying to shield him from Alexander's piercing gaze. The boy whimpered softly, and Alexander's heart lurched. It was impossible not to notice the familiar features, the delicate nose, the line of the chin. Everything about the infant screamed a disturbing resemblance. "This is neither the time nor the place, Alexander," Serafina replied, firm, yet her voice trembling. He took a step forward, his eyes locked on the baby. "Whose child is this?" His tone was more one of desperation than accusation, but Serafina seemed unmoved. She looked away, holding steady. "I don't owe you any explanations." The words were a direct hit. Alexander, who never accepted no in a negotiation, now found himself powerless before the woman who knew his every weakness. The need for answers burned inside him. "Don't run from me again, Serafina," he insisted, his voice now lower, more charged with urgency. "I need to know." She looked at him for a brief second, and in that gaze, he saw everything. Resentment, memories, stifled love. still open wounds. Then, she turned and started to walk away quickly, melting into the crowd as the baby nestled in her arms. Alexander stood rooted to the spot, motionless, his heart in pieces. The CEO everyone viewed as unbeatable was now lost, incapable even of breathing properly. The scene he had just witnessed wasn't just a reunion. It was a fissure in the world he thought he had under control. Back in his armored sedan, with the city blurring past the window, Alexander closed his eyes and leaned his head against the seat. The image of Serafina with the baby wouldn't leave his mind. Memories began to surface mercilessly. The nights they had loved fiercely, the promises exchanged early in their marriage, and, in contrast, the screams, the arguments, the coldness that led to their separation. He had always believed the divorce was final, that it was for the best. But now, with a single glimpse, the past rushed back, demanding answers that could no longer be ignored. When he finally arrived home, Alexander understood the scale of his emptiness. The enormous penthouse seemed even larger that night, every corner echoing his solitude. He tried to convince himself that he could move on, that perhaps that baby wasn't his. But deep down, he knew the truth that burned within him. There was a real chance that it was his son, and that chance was enough to make him realize that, for the first time in a long time, no report, contract, or meeting could silence the rising turmoil inside him. The reunion didn't just reopen wounds. It planted a doubt that would change everything. Alexander Vance, the man who always believed he owned his own destiny, had just discovered that he was at the mercy of a truth that could collapse his entire life. Part 2. The Ghost of the Past and the Search. Night fell over London, but Alexander couldn't escape the scene that had haunted him since morning. Serafina with a baby in her arms, Noah, as he heard a woman call him when she passed by on the street, was an image that pursued him like a ghost. No matter how many times he tried to concentrate on reports, contracts, or the investors' meeting he had embarrassingly abandoned, everything felt like distant noise. The man who always resolved million-pound dilemmas with icy composure now felt incapable of solving the simplest, most painful question. Was that boy his son? In his luxurious penthouse in Knightsbridge, surrounded by silence and walls of glass that reflected the glow of the city lights, Alexander poured a single malt scotch. The liquid flowed into the crystal glass, but even the liquor, which had so often worked as an anesthetic, couldn't quell the turmoil. Leaning back in his leather armchair, he closed his eyes and allowed himself to be dragged into the vortex of memories he had so carefully avoided. He went back to the beginning. The first time he met Serafina, when they were still young, and she was working as a junior architect for one of the firms that serviced Vance Global. He remembered the enthusiasm in her eyes, the way she defended projects with passion even in front of older executives. That was what attracted him, her courage, her authenticity, the way she seemed to see in him more than just the rising businessman. When they started dating, he discovered a sweet Serafina, full of simple yet grand dreams. She spoke of building a home with a garden, filling the walls with laughter, having children running down the halls. He, too pragmatic, would simply smile and say, "One day." Over time, that one day was perpetually postponed. The company grew rapidly. Business demanded more and more of him, and Alexander plunged into endless meetings, international travel, and strategic dinners. Serafina tried to understand, but the absence became unbearable. He remembered the arguments. She complained about the loneliness, the lack of time, the distance that grew even when they were in the same room. He, proud, countered that he was doing it all for them, for the comfortable life they had. The last fight was still crystal clear in his mind. He remembered Serafina standing in the living room, her eyes welling up, saying she couldn't bear living with a man who was always present for the world, but absent for her. He responded with coldness, hiding his fear behind cutting words. "Perhaps it's better if we go our separate ways." And when she didn't contest, just let a tear roll and walked away, he took it as a silent agreement. Days later, the divorce was finalized, and Alexander buried himself in work, as if he could smother the past under piles of reports. Now, with the image of Serafina holding Noah, everything made cruel sense. What if she had tried to say she was pregnant that night? What if her tears weren't just for the end of the marriage, but for the beginning of a life he never knew existed? Regret hit him like a devastating wave. That night, insomnia was his only companion. He paced the living room, his bare feet touching the cold floor, while the city slept. In every shadow reflected in the glass, he saw Serafina's silhouette. In every silence, he heard the baby's cry. When the sun began to rise, painting the horizon gold, Alexander realized he couldn't run anymore. He had to face the past head-on. No matter how painful, he decided to seek information. He called a trusted contact, a discreet investigator he usually hired for delicate matters. In a few hours, he had a report in his hands. Serafina was living in a simple apartment in a distant Islington neighborhood. No luxury, no ostentation. Her life had drastically changed since the divorce. Reading the address, Alexander felt a sharp pang in his chest. He never imagined Serafina living that way, far from the security and comfort he always believed he had provided. He closed the report forcefully, his eyes flashing with a mix of pain and determination. No matter the cost, no matter how many walls she raised against him, Alexander needed to look into Serafina's eyes and hear the truth from her mouth. He couldn't rest until he knew who that boy was. And deep down, something told him it wasn't just paternity at stake. It was also the chance, perhaps the last one, to repair the mistakes that destroyed the love of his life. Part 3. The confrontation and the half-truth. The decision solidified within him with an inevitable weight. Alexander was not a man to hesitate. In corporate life, his motto had always been to act quickly and firmly, leaving no room for uncertainty. But facing Serafina and that baby, his determination took on a completely new dimension. This wasn't about closing a contract or winning a negotiation. It was about facing his own past, tearing out answers that could change the course of his life. The next afternoon, Alexander found himself in front of the modest building where Serafina lived. The simple facade, the rusty iron gate, the absence of security at the entrance, everything contrasted with the luxuries he was accustomed to. The man who usually moved in penthouses and five-star hotels was now standing on an ordinary sidewalk, feeling his heart race as it hadn't in years. He took a deep breath, adjusted his suit, and climbed the steps to the door. When Serafina opened it, the surprise was immediate. Her eyes widened for an instant, but quickly narrowed with caution. The baby, Noah, was in her arms, his tiny eyes alert, as if sensing the tension between the adults. "Alexander," she murmured suspiciously, "what are you doing here?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need to talk to you," she sighed, clearly torn between sending him away and letting him in. The baby whined, moving in her arms. It was that detail, perhaps, that made her reluctantly step aside. Alexander walked in and was immediately enveloped by the soft scent of milk and lavender that permeated the apartment. The atmosphere was simple but welcoming. Toys scattered on the rug, a colorful blanket on the couch, small details that revealed a life dedicated to the child. Alexander felt a pang in his chest. For years he believed he was offering Serafina the best of everything. Trips, expensive gifts, comfort. Now, seeing her in that modest home, He realized that perhaps all she ever wanted was exactly this: simplicity, presence, family. Serafina faced him, arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. Alexander approached slowly, his eyes inevitably resting on Noah. The boy stared back with curiosity, and the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same firm gaze, the same shape of the chin. Alexander hesitantly extended his hand, but didn't touch him. He just whispered, "He's beautiful." Serafina hardened her expression. "That doesn't give you the right to show up here as if nothing happened." Alexander turned his gaze back to her. "I didn't come here to pretend nothing happened. I came because I need answers. Serafina, is this boy my son?" She pressed her lips together, holding back the emotion that threatened to overflow. "You lost the right to ask questions when you decided to leave me alone, Alexander." His words came out in a breath, almost begging. "I made a mistake, I know. But I can't pretend I didn't see him. I can't live in this doubt. I need to know." Serafina walked to the couch and sat down with Noah in her lap. The boy began to play with his mother's fingers, oblivious to the weight of the words hanging in the air. She took a deep breath, facing her ex-husband. "I got pregnant shortly after you left, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let you walk into his life as if you've always been here." Alexander felt his heart pound. It wasn't a direct confirmation, but it wasn't a denial either. It was as if she had handed him a half-truth, waiting to see how he would react. He knelt down in front of the couch, getting to her level, and spoke with more gentleness than he intended. "I don't want to take anything from you. I just want to be present. I want the chance to know my son." She looked up, her eyes misty but maintained her resolve. "It won't be that simple. You've always known how to talk beautifully, Alexander. But what destroyed me wasn't your words. It was your absences. I won't allow Noah to go through the same thing." Alexander closed his eyes for an instant, feeling the weight of guilt crush him. When he opened them, there was a new determination in his expression. "Then test me, Serafina. Put me through the ringer. Let me show you that I'm not that man blinded by work anymore." She observed him in silence. Behind the resistance, there was emotion in her gaze. The truth was, Serafina still loved him, despite everything. But love didn't equate to trust. The baby, as if sensing the heavy atmosphere, began to fuss. Alexander tentatively held out his arms, asking for permission to hold him. Serafina hesitated, but finally gave in. When Noah nestled into his arms, the crying stopped almost immediately. Alexander looked at the boy, and a knot tightened in his throat. He looks like me," he said, almost in a whisper. Serafina looked away, trying to hold back her tears. "That means nothing." Alexander looked at her, firmly. "To me, it means everything." In that instant, an invisible thread connected the three of them. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. A fragile, unstable, but real beginning. Alexander knew he still had many barriers to face, but for the first time in months, he felt he had a chance, and he was willing to fight for it. Part 4. The unyielding walls and the hospital crisis. The reunion at Serafina's house hadn't left Alexander's mind. For the first time in a long time, he had felt the weight of a responsibility that went far beyond spreadsheets and corporate decisions. Little Noah's gaze, curious and innocent, was now etched into his memory like an invisible tattoo. It was as if the child had branded him with a mark impossible to ignore. 2 days later, Alexander returned. Serafina was reluctant to open the door, but conceded. The air inside the apartment was infused with a soft smell of baby powder. The baby was sleeping in the portable crib next to the couch, breathing peacefully, oblivious to the tension that filled the room. "I thought it was clear I don't want you here, Alexander," she said, as soon as he entered. Her arms crossed and her expression firm. He took a deep breath, trying to control his tone. "Serafina, I can't live in doubt. I need to understand. You know what this boy means to me, or what he could mean." She narrowed her eyes, wounded. "And I don't know what it means to you, Alexander. That's what frightens me." Silence settled. Alexander looked at the crib and then turned back to her. "Tell me the truth. Is he my son?" Serafina sighed, running her hands through her hair. Her eyes shimmered with restrained tears. "I got pregnant right after our divorce, but that changes nothing." He stared, confused. "Changes nothing? How does that change nothing, Serafina? That changes everything." She raised her voice for the first time that night. "Changes what, Alexander? Will it change the fact that you weren't there when I found out I was pregnant? Will it erase all the nights I cried alone, scared, not knowing how to move forward?" Alexander felt his stomach drop. Her words were daggers, and each one hit with surgical precision. He approached, lowering his tone. "I didn't know, Serafina. If I had known, I would have stayed. I would have stayed." She cut him off, laughing bitterly. "No, Alexander. You would have called me dramatic. You would have said you were too busy to deal with it. That's how it was the whole time, remember?" He lowered his eyes, ashamed. The truth was, he had no argument. The image of himself working late, ignoring calls, canceling dinners, came back like a punch to the gut. "I know I failed," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "But I can't change the past. I can only change the present." Serafina fell silent, walked to the crib, and gently stroked the sleeping baby's cheek. For a few seconds, she seemed lost in thought. When she turned around again, there was a silent pain in her eyes. "Alexander, I don't want Noah to grow up tied to promises. I won't let him depend on a man who says one thing and does another." He moved closer, his voice charged with emotion. "Then test me, Serafina. Not with words. Test me with actions." She took a deep breath, studying him. The Alexander standing before her seemed different from the man she had left months ago. He was still the same in posture, in the firm tone of his voice, but there was something in his eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps even sincere regret. Still, fear was stronger. "You don't understand," she said, her voice strained. "I built walls to protect my son, to protect myself. I can't just tear everything down because you've decided to show up." Alexander felt tears burn his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. "Then tell me what I need to do to deserve this chance." She turned away, avoiding his gaze. "This isn't something you can decide with effort or money. It's about trust. And trust, Alexander, is built over time." His words hung in the air like a sentence. He nodded slowly, understanding there would be no shortcuts. But inside him, the flame of determination burned brighter. He was willing to face every barrier, every test, every sleepless night if necessary. Before leaving, he approached the crib one last time. He watched Noah sleep, his face serene, and a knot tightened in his throat. He gently kissed the boy's tiny hand and murmured, almost as a promise to himself, "I will be here, son, even if your mother doesn't believe in me now. I will be here." Serafina heard him, but didn't reply. She just watched silently, her heart divided between resentment and hope. Alexander left that night with more doubts than answers, but also with an unwavering conviction. He wouldn't let the past dictate the future. If there was a path back, even if narrow and full of thorns, he was willing to walk it. The tension between Alexander and Serafina remained a dense cloud, but destiny once again decided to intervene. A few days after the harsh conversation where Serafina made it clear that trust wasn't rebuilt with words, Alexander's phone rang. He was in a board meeting, surrounded by screens, spreadsheets, and the watchful eyes of executives expecting quick decisions. But upon seeing her name flash on the screen, his heart raced. Serafina never called him. He answered immediately, his voice firm, masking his anxiety. Serafina? On the other end, her voice was shaky. Distressed. It's Noah, Alexander. He has a high fever. I don't know what to do. I'm heading to the hospital. The world stopped. Without thinking, Alexander rose from his chair, ignoring the protests and confused looks of the partners. Send me the address. I'm on my way. And he hung up. His driver accelerated through the gridlocked London streets. But for Alexander, every second felt like an eternity. His hands were sweating, and he wondered how it was possible to feel so much fear for someone he barely knew, or knew deeply, because deep down he had already felt that boy was part of him, even without written confirmation. In the children's emergency room at a busy Tantin NHS hospital, he found Serafina sitting on a plastic chair, the baby in her arms. Little Noah was crying, his face red, his breathing labored, his eyes tear-filled. Alexander's chest tightened as never before. He rushed to them, kneeling in front of Serafina. "Give him to me," he asked, almost breathless. Serafina hesitated, but desperation was stronger than pride. She handed Noah over, and Alexander received him gently, cradling him against his chest. Surprisingly, the crying began to subside. The baby calmed, snuggling into his arms, as if recognizing something familiar in that embrace. Alexander felt his heart tremble, and tears that he would never allow to fall in public threatened to escape. "It's okay, son. Daddy is here," he murmured, without even realizing he had used the word Serafina avoided. "Daddy." She watched him in silence, her heart divided. Part of her wanted to repel that gesture, remembering the nights she had been alone. But another part couldn't ignore the naturalness with which Noah nestled in his father's arms. The doctor attended to them shortly after. Following tests, he explained that it was a common virus, but the fever required monitoring. Serafina sighed in relief, and so did Alexander, though he was still trembling inside. They left the hospital together late into the night, the cool pre-dawn air enveloping them. "Thank you for coming," Serafina said quietly, almost against her own will. Alexander looked at Hietzebitisha, his eyes still tinged with light. "Don't thank me. I should have been here from the beginning." In the car, Noah slept in Serafina's lap, and Alexander couldn't take his eyes off them. The scene seemed so simple, yet it was more precious than any corporate conquest. He, who had always believed that success was measured in numbers, began to realize that perhaps he had been wrong all along. When they arrived at her building, he insisted on helping her upstairs. Once in the apartment, while she gently placed the baby in the crib, Alexander remained watching, silent, with a strange sensation in his chest, as if he were looking at what he had always wanted, but never knew how to name. When Serafina turned around, he was still there, standing, hands in his pockets. "You don't need to stay," she said in a neutral tone. "I know how to handle this alone now." He took a deep breath. "I know you do, but I don't want you to have to handle it alone never again." Serafina swallowed hard. She didn't respond. She just ran a hand through her hair and sighed. The silence that followed wasn't heavy as before. It was almost comfortable. Alexander approached the crib, leaned over, and gently stroked Noah's tiny hand. The boy stirred, but didn't wake up. Alexander smiled in a way he hadn't in a long time. He turned to Serafina, and his voice heavy with emotion said, "He needs me, but you do too." She stared at him, her eyes misty, and for an instant it seemed she would reply, but she recoiled, closing off again. "Don't confuse things, Alexander. One night doesn't change the past." He nodded. "No, it doesn't, but it can change the future." Serafina looked away, but deep down, his words found a place in her heart. Alexander left the apartment that night feeling different. He didn't have her forgiveness yet, nor the certainty that he could rebuild what was lost. But he had taken the first real step. He had been present in a crucial moment. And, most importantly, he had felt the truth in his arms that no test could deny. In that instant, he knew he was willing to face any battle to win back Serafina's trust and the right to be called Daddy by Noah. Part 5. The cost of absolute certainty. The night at the hospital had left deep marks on Alexander. He could still feel little Noah's warmth in his arms, hear the crying that had turned to calm as soon as the baby recognized his embrace, and remember how, instinctively, he had whispered the word, Daddy. For him, that moment had been a revelation. But for Serafina, it was just a moment of need, a temporary relief that didn't change the past. In the following days, Alexander tried to stay close. He showed up with bags of groceries, helped carry the stroller, and stood ready whenever Serafina needed something. But although she accepted the help, she maintained a wall between them. The glances they exchanged were full of lingering hurt, and even when there was tenderness in her gestures, a distance stubbornly remained. And it was in this gap, this space between what he felt and what he knew, that the decision that would change everything was born. Alexander could no longer live in doubt. Every smile from Noah, every resemblance he saw, every time the boy nestled in his arms, everything pointed to a blatant truth. But what if he was wrong? What if, deep down, that bond was just a desperate projection of a regretful man? One afternoon, the confrontation became inevitable. Serafina was preparing the baby bottle when Alexander walked into the kitchen. His look was different, determined, somber, almost cold. She immediately sensed that something was about to happen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. She looked up, suspicious. "About what?" Alexander took a deep breath, like a man preparing for a fall. "About Noah. I need a DNA test." The silence that followed was deafening. Serafina stopped, the bottle still in her hands, and stared at him with disbelief. "You are asking me what?" "Asking me." He held her gaze, even as he felt his heart tearing apart. "I need to be sure. I can't keep living with this doubt, Serafina. I can't commit myself to him without knowing with absolute clarity that he is my son." She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was bitter, wounded. "You need a piece of paper to believe what is right in front of your eyes. You need a lab report to trust me?" Alexander approached, his voice choked. "It's not that. It's not about trusting or not trusting. It's about me not surviving the possibility of being wrong. If I give myself over to this boy and then discover he's not my son, His voice failed, and he swallowed hard. "I couldn't bear it." Serafina dropped the bottle onto the counter with a loud clatter, tears welling in her eyes. "You have no idea what you're saying, Alexander. I spent months alone, facing every fear, every sleepless night. And now, when you finally have the chance to be here, all you can give me is suspicion?" He took one step closer, his eyes moist. "I messed up, Serafina. I know I wasn't here when you needed me most. But if I don't take this test, I'll continue to be the same man who fails, who can't handle the truth. I need this. I need to look at that result and know it's not my mind deceiving me." She turned her back, crying silently. The sound of her ragged breathing cut through Alexander more deeply than any words. After a few seconds, Serafina took a deep breath and replied, her voice broken. "If that's what you need, then let's do the test. But know that for me, this isn't just a DNA test. It's a test of trust, and you've already entered this trial losing." Alexander closed his eyes, feeling the sting of those words, but he didn't back down. He knew that without that step, he would never have peace. Part 6. The result and the reckoning. In the days that followed, the wait for the result became torture. Alexander spent sleepless nights, sitting in his armchair, reviving every detail of the past. Serafina also suffered in silence, divided between protecting the child and desperately wishing his father was truly there. The envelope finally arrived, a simple piece of paper, folded and sealed, but carrying the power to unite or destroy what was left of them. Alexander received it, his heart pounding, his legs heavy. The envelope lay on the coffee table of the small apartment, as if it were a bomb about to explode. Alexander and Serafina were there, face to face, but it was as if an abyss separated them. "Are you going to open it, or let this kill us from the inside out?" Serafina's voice broke the silence, firm yet strained. Alexander carefully tore the edge, his heart hammering. His eyes scanned the technical lines until they stopped at the final sentence, highlighted in bold. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. He swallowed hard, the weight he carried in his chest giving way to an overwhelming wave of emotion. Alexander looked up at Serafina, and his voice came out in a broken whisper. "He's my son, Serafina. Noah is my son." Serafina breathed deeply, the tears she had tried so hard to hold back finally streaming down her face. "I never lied to you, Alexander. Never!" Shame burned within. He closed his eyes. "I know, and I can't change the fact that I didn't believe you. But now that I know the truth, I swear I won't lose more days of his life." He stood up and walked to the bedroom. Serafina didn't stop him. Alexander approached the crib and stood watching his son sleep. Noah grabbed his finger with surprising strength. Alexander felt his heart shatter and rebuild at the same time. "I will be here, son," he murmured. "I will be here." When he returned to the living room, he found Serafina standing, tears still falling. He approached, hesitant. "I am sorry, not just for doubting you, but for everything, for not being there when you needed me most." She stared at him, her eyes full of pain. "You have no idea what it was like to go through everything alone, discovering the pregnancy, giving birth, sleepless nights, and not having you by my side. I don't know if I can forgive that." He took a deep breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me now, but give me the chance to show you that I've learned. Let me be by your side, not as the man who failed, but as the father Noah deserves." The silence that followed was charged with everything unresolved. Serafina fought the contradictory feelings. Still, she conceded a partial surrender. "I don't know if I can trust you, Alexander, but I won't stop you from being in his life. Noah has the right to know his father." Alexander met her with a fragile but genuine smile. "That's all I need. I'll conquer the rest, day by day." He carefully touched her hand. She didn't pull it away. It was a minimal gesture, but it represented something immense. They were linked forever by that boy. And for the first time, Alexander felt he had a new chance, not just to be a father, but perhaps to win back the love he had lost. And he wouldn't let that chance slip away. Part 7. Actions over promises. The DNA result confirmed the truth, but the emotional chasm between Alexander and Serafina remained. He knew he had to rebuild their connection, brick by painful brick. He began to prove himself with actions. He showed up early with groceries. He attempted to give Noah his first bath, soaking his designer shirt and making the baby cry. But he didn't give up. Slowly, Noah relaxed in his arms. He stopped avoiding messy tasks, spending sleepless nights rocking Noah, sleeping on an uncomfortable armchair, just so Serafina wouldn't be alone. She noticed he was there because he wanted to be, not out of obligation. One afternoon at a Hyde Park playground, Alexander chased Noah as the boy started to crawl on the grass. Serafina watched him, the man who once only knew boardrooms, now throwing himself onto the ground for his son's laughter. When he returned, His face was illuminated by a genuine, childlike smile. "He has your courage, Serafina," Alexander said, looking at Noah. "But I think he inherited my stubbornness." She laughed, the first genuine laughter he'd heard in years. In that sound, Alexander saw a flicker of the woman he had lost. Later, at home, as Noah slept, Alexander knelt before Serafina, a gesture unthinkable for the proud man he had been. "I know I can't ask you to forget the past. I can't erase the nights you cried alone, or the fact that I doubted you. But I can promise that I won't repeat the same mistakes. I want to be different, Serafina. For you. For our son." A part of her screamed not to be fooled again. But another part, the one that still loved him, began to yield. "You always knew how to use pretty words, Alexander. The problem is they never came accompanied by actions." He smiled without irony. "Then look at me now. These aren't words. These are choices. I'm here, and I'm not leaving again." She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, and when she opened them, there was a glimmer of hope. She didn't say yes or "I forgive you," but she extended her hand and held his. It was a small, powerful gesture. Alexander felt his heart warm. This wasn't the end of the battle, but it was the first real victory. That night, as they put Noah in the crib, they stood side by side, watching their son sleep. The silence was no longer one of resentment, but of an approaching peace. Alexander lightly rested his shoulder against hers, and Serafina didn't move away. It was this way, between errors and successes, tears and smiles, that they began a new chapter. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since the divorce, there was a family again. And deep down, both knew. This time, they wouldn't let pride destroy what they still had. Conclusion. The home. They found time passed, and the turbulent days of uncertainty gave way to a new routine. Little by little, the wounds began to heal. The apartment, once silent, was now filled with the sounds of a family. Noah's laughter, Alexander's firm steps arriving earlier from work, conversations at night marked by sharing. On that sunny late afternoon, Noah, now nearly 18 months old, was attempting his first real steps. He advanced with open arms toward Alexander, who, crouched down, encouraged him. "Come on, champ, just one more step." With a heroic effort, Noah crossed the short distance and fell into his father's arms. Alexander lifted him up, laughing loudly, and the baby giggled, thrilled with his own achievement. Serafina, watching from the kitchen doorway, couldn't hold back her tears. She smiled. "He got your stubbornness," she replied with an emotional smile. Alexander looked at her for a long moment, and in that look, there was everything words couldn't translate. Still holding Noah, he moved closer to her. "He wasn't the only one who took the first steps, Serafina. I did too, and I won't stop. Every day, I want to be better for both of you." She looked at him, and this time, she didn't look away. She extended her hand and touched his face. "I know, Alexander. I see it. And however much it still hurts to remember, I also know that the man standing before me is no longer the one who left me alone." It was a simple, yet powerful moment. They were starting over, not as husband and wife trying to sustain an illusion, but as two people who learned from pain and decided to rebuild. Later, as they put Noah to sleep, Alexander intertwined his fingers with Serafina's, and she didn't pull away. "You know, Serafina," he murmured, "I built empires. I closed million-pound contracts, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to this. To you too." Serafina smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder. "And all I ever wanted was this, from the start, Alexander. Just you being present." He kissed the top of her head. In his heart, he knew that the complete forgiveness would take time. But he also knew that now he had something he didn't possess before, the certainty that he wouldn't face anything alone again. And so, on that quiet night, Alexander Vance, the CEO everyone judged unbeatable, but who was just a man who chose redemption, finally found what he had never known to seek: a home, a love reborn, and the silent promise of a future that, for too long, seemed impossible. In the end, Alexander and Serafina understood that true love is not made of perfection, but of daily choices. They had gone through the abyss of separation, the pain of distrust, and the weight of mistakes that nearly destroyed them. Yet, despite all the falls, they chose to get up, not just for Noah, but because deep inside them, there was still a flame that, despite everything, never went out. Never. That flame now burned stronger, transformed by maturity, by the courage to start anew, and by the certainty that the past didn't have to define the future. And so, between their son's laughter and the silent glances that spoke more than words, they realized that the home they sought was not a luxurious house or a flawless life. It was the embrace that became a safe harbor. It was the forgiveness that brought peace. It was the presence that replaced any promise. Together, they learned that love is not the absence of falling, but the decision to walk hand in hand, even when the ground seems to crumble. And this time, they were ready to live each day as if it were the first, knowing that their hearts had finally found the place where they always belonged. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment "amazing story" below to let me know you're with me.